Good evening, everybody. This meeting will be live streamed and available for subsequent playback through the Council's website. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during this webcast will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy. Right, any apologies for absence?
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Elliott and we have apologies from Councillor McCrossan, and Councillor Miller is substituting.
Right. So, Councillor Greensmith hasn't turned up yet. Okay. Right. First item on the agenda, item number 2, is to approve as the correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March 2021. Those are pages 5 to 7 in your agenda.
Move it.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Any seconder? Councillor Fox, thank you. Any comments? Those in favour, please show. Any against? 100% for. Okay, thank you. Right. Declarations of interest. None? Okay. Right. Item 4. The internal audits report of the head of internal audit, pages 9 to 116. Who's going to be leading on this? He's here?
Hi, sorry, Guppy, just give you 1 second. Sorry for the low tech way we're going to have to do this. Bob, can you just switch yours off, please? Thank you. Sorry, we just need to get you on the screen for everyone. It might be a moment.
No problem.
It will be. Right, so because there's a bit of a fault with the kit, I hope you can all see Gurpreet. I know it's not ideal, but it's the best we could do because it only broke earlier today. So can Gurpreet, can you hear and see everybody?
I can see everybody and I can hear you.
Excellent. Can you all hear that?
Just about.
Okay.
If I press that.
No.
Right, good evening, Pete. I believe you're going to run us through the internal audits reports.
Correct.
Off you go. Off you go then.
Oh, okay, sorry, is it my item now? Okay, fine. So in the packs, let me know, I'll try and speak a bit louder, but let me know if the sound isn't clear enough. So we have our progress report, which is on page 11 of your packs. So this just gives an update on the 2020-2021 year, which is our first year as your internal auditors, and then just a bit of a snapshot of the 2021-22 year. So just looking at the prior year first, there are 3 reports that we're reporting to you, to this committee. So commercialisation, health and safety, and waste and recycling. And that completes our audit plan for the prior year, with exception to one review, which is taxi licensing, which has been issued in draft and seen by management, and we've received responses, but it's not quite final. It's not quite final yet. So on page 14 of the packs, it then just has a table which gives you I feel a useful snapshot of the year. So as you may recall, we have different opinion levels. Substantial is our highest, moderate is the next highest, limited is next after that, and then no assurance. The majority, or almost in majority, as you see, are substantial, with pretty much an equal number of moderate opinions. There is a limited, which is one of the reports that we're reporting today, but overall a pretty positive picture in terms of the opinions that we've given over the last year. And then on the next page, and this is just more of a forward look, is the 2021-22 programme. And obviously, these are the reviews that you previously signed off in the audit plan. And what you can see from here is that the planning has started, and it's got the planned audit committee dates for when we expect to then provide those reports to committee. So that plan's well underway, and we've been working with Alison and Paul in particular more recently in helping to make sure that that plan gets off the ground and starts appropriately. So that's kind of progress of where we are up to. So as I mentioned, there are 3 reports that we're issuing to this committee. So there's commercialisation, health and safety, and waste and recycling. So the commercialisation review, this was a limited in terms of the design and on the effectiveness. We had 1 high finding and 3 medium findings. This was looking at a number of commercial activities that the council have undertaken, particularly some of the findings were around the pet cremation services, and we raised findings in there around some of the business plan, business case, market research, evidence and audit trail process should have been stronger than what we had seen, and so that led to a high finding in that report, and that's probably the key one just to focus on for now. So as you'll know, the council have a pet cremation service. It hasn't quite achieved the income levels it was expected to achieve. So as part of that, we went back, looked at the original market data that was used to approve the plan, to look at the business case and the business plan, the marketing strategy, and there are a number of areas where we felt the evidence and the process that went through could have been stronger and better documented, and arguably some of that may have contributed to the position that venture is in delivering less income than expected. You then have health and safety being the next report. There are 3 medium findings here. So these are from a number of different areas, but the key one that I'll pick out is there was an 18-19 health and safety review that was done. It had a list of actions that came out of that, and there's a number of those which still require to be implemented. One of them is around contractor lists, and when engaging contractors, there's requirements to obtain documentation from them, get them to complete questionnaires so you know that they are able to conduct in a safe manner, and we found a reasonable level of non-compliance with some of those processes, which led to the medium. We didn't rate it as high because actually there hasn't been an excessive need to actually commission those contractors over the last 12 months. And so whilst there is a risk there with non-compliance, it hasn't really come to fruition. It hasn't led to cases of health and safety incidents increasing necessarily, and so therefore we rated that as medium. And there's also a finding in that report about risk assessments. So of our sample of 20, we did find some areas of non-compliance, whether that was risk assessments were overdue and not done on the right regularity, or not fully complete and signed off. So there was another medium finding around that. And the final report was waste and recycling. Again, 3 medium findings. The first one was around risk assessments when drivers undertake their routes. Whenever there's a new route or a new property that's been added to the route that may be visited, there's a requirement to do a risk assessment to make sure that it's safe and that it can be accessed appropriately. That's not consistently performed from what we've seen. And probably the second finding around indicators. So there are KPIs that the council have in place around reaching certain targets in environmentally recycling effectively. And what we found there is actually the targets the council have set are below both national and EU targets and then actually not always achieving those targets in those areas. We appreciate this is an area that's not fully in the council's gift, and it gets quite complex with contamination of waste, which causes difficulty in achieving some of those targets. But there's an area of focus there as well. So I'll pause there, because obviously the full reports are in the packs as well, but that's just a summary of those three. Happy to take questions on those, and then after that I'll then progress with the other parts of the paper.
Thank you, Pete. Does anybody have any questions for the Pete?
Just an observation at this stage.
Can you use your microphone, please, Councillor?
Just an observation at this stage, Chair, that it is good to see the thoroughness of these reviews, and I think obviously the one that gives us cause is commercialisation, and I understand that processes have been put in to alleviate and hopefully to bring the services into profit. Alison, I understand you've got some further information on that.
Anybody else got any comments?
Yeah, if I may, Chair, thank you. In response to Meredith's question there, I suppose it's quite unusual for us to receive a report with limited assurance, and perhaps some of the performance information included in the report in terms of for the financial deficits perhaps does also raise some concerns. So perhaps just by a way of a bit of background for you, I just wanted to assure you that there hasn't been a total absence of management of these projects or the risks as we've gone along. But perhaps, unfortunately, some of those have not been formally documented and perhaps not been well evidenced during the audit. I think it is fair to say that some of the original business case assumptions perhaps ultimately were proven to be a little bit optimistic in terms of the profile for sales growth. And that might have linked back to some of the initial market research that Gurpreet alluded to. But we did recognise that at quite an early stage, and we've had regular reports into Cabinet all through every quarter. It's been reported through the Cabinet quarterly performance reports. So really early on in quarter one of 2019-20, we did report to Cabinet that the profiling of the income and the growth was overly optimistic, and we did bring that back down to a break-even position at that point. And since then, we did still build, still hoping that we're going to get growth in that to move it into a surplus position. We have also done work on reducing the costs of the services as well, and some improvements in the quotes process. And we did then reprofile that service over a 4-year growth period. And you'll also perhaps have seen in quarter one of 2021, again reporting into Cabinet, we did report, partly due to COVID, that we did expect that service to fall into a deficit position during last year, which it did and has been identified in the report. And so we do currently include a break-even assumption within our budgets for 21-22. And hopefully, see how that goes this year, and hopefully that will move into a surplus position thereafter. But broadly speaking, we're not now expecting this to help us with our efficiency programme. We've removed it in the medium-term plan, so we're not reliant upon it in terms of our efficiency delivery for the medium-term plan. But as I say, we do hope to see that we'll continue working on the activity and hope to move it into a surplus position as we move forward. So what BDO have done, or Gurpreet has done for us in the internal audit report, has provided us with a really independent and objective review, and does give us some real valid learning points, opportunities for lessons as we move forward. This was one of our very first commercial opportunities. So I think perhaps there were lessons to be learned in the business case. So there are improvements that we can make in terms of the business planning approach, the quotes approach, all of the recommendations that GovPre has made in the report. And I think they have all been accepted by management and they are being taken on board. And I've spoken with the corporate director responsible for the service today, and she is planning to bring a report into SLT within the next month for the next step. So I can assure you that this is all in hand. I suppose the further issue for us, again, very at the start of this process, one of the first that we didn't have fully embedded project management processes in place. They are now all in place. So actually, that probably reduces the risk for us of this recurring in the future. So with Alice reporting back, she's happy to come to the committee if you would like that. But if we should come into SLT first, and I suppose there's a further reassurance for you. Obviously, internal audit will be including this in their follow-up report. So if the actions aren't implemented as agreed, then that will obviously come back into this committee. So you can add a further challenge at that point.
Hi.
Councillor Clooney.
Hi. Yeah, I'd like to say that just from the point of scrutiny, as the chair of scrutiny, I sorry we weren't over this earlier, but I think, as you say, because it's a new thing, this commercialisation thing is a new thing we're having to undertake to try and sort out our efficiencies and sort out our finances. It is perhaps something that we weren't fully on top of beforehand, but I'm sure it sounds like things are getting very much on top of it now. But I'd be glad for scrutiny to be involved in future business cases of this nature. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Greensmith.
Firstly, Chair, many apologies for being late. Secondly, Alison, are you saying that the commercials are currently not breaking even? I'm just a little unclear with what you were trying to say. And when have you done any projections as to when, if they are loss-making, have you made any projections on when you think they'll be break-even stroke in profit? And are you also saying that at the moment they're not in the, what do you call it, the long-term plan for the efficiencies of this current council? Sorry, that's a long-winded question.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so as it's detailed in the audit report, that both of the trees and the pet cremation service were actually in deficit for the first 2 years. So the second year was partly due to COVID, so there was some impact on there. First year, overly optimistic growth included. So we are now, for the current financial year, assuming a break-even position, so neither surplus nor deficit. But obviously that will depend upon the income that we generate. What I can say is that there is an upward trend in particularly for the tree services. So we are seeing, you can see the upward trajectory for that in terms of income sales. So we will be keeping that under a close review. We're not projecting any surpluses in the future medium-term plan for these items, but we will be working towards moving them into a surplus position.
Thank you, Alison. Anybody else got any questions or comments? Well, if I may, I'd like to say that I've checked through all the audit agendas since 2019, and I couldn't find any mention of either of these two areas. I may have missed something. I was quite disappointed to read the internal audit report. I understand Councillor Clooney is considering already referring this to overview and scrutiny. Is that correct?
There's a question coming up in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, next week about it.
Yeah, the market research, as has already been said, seems to be a little bit over-optimistic. 16% of UK pet cremations supposedly be coming to Gedling. Rather hopeful, I would have thought. I gather this is going to be looked at in more detail by senior officers, and I already know that our new director, Alice Davey, has already started on this. Can I suggest that we have a brief report added to the agenda for the Audit Committee on this particular topic, so we're updated on a regular basis? Is that possible? Good. I also would like to see a more robust forward plan developed. I know that the pet crematorium service is very well run. I unfortunately had to have one of my cats cremated after it died. They couldn't have been more helpful or compassionate, but there seems to be a poor amount of marketing both on that and for the tree services, which I also understand some of the councillors have used, and they were quite satisfied with it. Right, I think it's enough on that. Sorry, I didn't see you, Councillor Fox.
It was more of an observation, actually. I just wanted to say that obviously there are issues that have been highlighted in this audit. And I am very pleased that the new corporate director, Alice Davey, is taking these issues up and will report back to this committee in due course. I do think it is important, though, that the council do pursue commercial enterprises. It's very difficult with a backdrop of government cuts to councils to sustain financial stability. And obviously this council's had its budget cut by 60% over the last few years. So I can see the importance of developing these commercial enterprises. I know it's not an arena that we've necessarily gone down before, and I think that any business starting up wouldn't expect to break even perhaps so soon. And also I would expect processes to be refined in time and it to be a learning curve. So I am very happy that we continue to offer these tree services and also the pet crematorium to our constituents, because it's important to provide a competitively priced service to them. And I'm very pleased also that Alice will bring back the report to this committee in due course with the updated marketing strategies and future plans for refining this service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. You actually raised an interesting point which I hadn't thought of. You said about offering these services to our residents. Is there any reason at all we cannot offer them to residents of other districts and boroughs or the city?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so that depends on the legal powers that we have, so as to where we can actually provide our services. So that very much depends on the individual service itself. So some of that is also, if we can go outside of the borough, we can't always make a profit. And I think that's the case for one of these services here. So if you wanted a little bit more information on that, then we can include that in the report next time.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. It's interesting that at Appendix 2 of the report on commercialisation, there is a list of suggested, page 42, There's a list of suggested areas which the council could look at. And I understand that some of them have already been implemented by the council. Pre-application advice for planning applications, and I believe also charging developers for street naming services. So I think what I'd like to do at this particular junction is to propose a resolution that we receive the reports, note actions taken or to be taken, and ask the Director of Service for the commercialisation projects to give a report at the next meeting of this committee.
Any against? Carried unanimously. Good, right. Agenda item. Sorry? Oh, thank you. Over to Gurpreet.
It's okay? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. So page 18 of the packs, it's just to highlight there, we are a new service. We've been working with the council now for a year. Obviously, the vast majority of that has been under COVID rules, which has obviously impacted our engagement to some extent. But after each audit, we do issue a survey to those who have been subject to the audit and supported us. They can score us the highest score of 5, which I think is deemed exceptional. 3 is average or fair, and 4 is very good. You can see at the bottom there, just to give you a bit of a sense that hopefully the service is operating, and whilst there are areas I think we can improve in, and hopefully that would improve naturally as well as we're able to come kind of out of some of the restrictions that we're in at the moment, that the average across the kind of key areas across 3 of them are 4 or comfortably into 4. There's one area which is 3.75, but actually when you break that down, 3 of those reviews scored us a 4, and it was only 1 that scored us a 3. And so hopefully that's more of an outlier, but we will continue to get these survey responses. But just to give you some comfort, we do ask that it gets completed. We share that in these meetings openly. So we'll try and continue to do that and maintain the levels that we've set here. There's a sector update there, which I'll skip over, but if anyone has any particular questions, happy on that. So that kind of completes the progress report. After that, you then have the actual full reports, which I think we've talked through. So unless there's any other questions on the actual full reports, that otherwise then takes us down to what is page 83 of your packs, which is the follow-up report. So before I start the follow-up report, I'm just going to double check, are there any other questions on any parts of the progress report before I move on to the paper, which starts on page 83 of your packs?
Any questions?
No? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Move on, please, now, Gurpreet.
Yep, so in terms of this is our follow-up, which obviously Alison mentioned, which is a key part of our process, that after every report, we obviously raise findings and then we follow them up to see if they have actually been actioned. And as we are only a year into our contract, we are following up our predecessor in RSM in their recommendations, as well as the ones that we have raised, which have come due. So there's quite a complicated table on the what is page 84, but I'll skip over that. But that has the full details of where everything is up to. But the summary on page 85, I think, is more helpful. So it just sets out the number of recommendations, how many are outstanding, how many have been completed, and then following this page is all the detail of them as well. So you can see each individual detail. So again, happy to take questions on that. But without going through all of the detail, I'll just do a high level. In terms of process, it's worked reasonably well in that we've had a relatively good engagement with a number of recommendations, although there have been areas where we've struggled to get as many responses or as strong responses as we'd like. I think that's partly COVID, partly we're new and we haven't built up some of those relationships. Obviously, Paul, who's now joined the council, is working more closely with us, and I think that should help the process next time round. So there are areas where we're noting that some actions are not complete, as you'll see in the bullet points. Obviously, we will continue to follow these up. At this stage, I would say I'm not overly concerned with some of the follow-up where we don't have responses or if they're not complete and move back. But I think if this persisted for another committee, then that concern would probably rise a little bit because obviously I kind of see it that a report that we issue is just a piece of paper. Unless it's followed up and then implemented, well, that's actually where the real change and value comes from, is when people actually then deliver on the actions that have been agreed. And so obviously if they're sitting there unacted upon, or if that continues, then that might cause a challenge. But at this moment, there are a number that have been implemented or superseded. But with the ones that are not done, we will continue to follow up and work with management and others to make sure that they get done. So happy to take any questions over the process or obviously individual recommendations if you have any questions on those.
Thank you, Pete. Has anybody got any questions or want any clarification on anything? Okay, thank you, Pete.
Okay, and then the final paper starts on page 97 of your pack. So as part of our role of internal auditors, we deliver an annual opinion. So this is our view of the governance, risk and control environment of the council, taking into account all the work that we've done, speaking with external auditors, looking at other papers and information on the council, including your financial position, and come to a view as to the overall effectiveness in terms of control, risk and governance. So we've issued a moderate opinion, so that's our second highest opinion, and that is what the vast majority of local authorities we work with receive that opinion. So from a comparator, you're in amongst the pack on that basis. Obviously, when I showed you earlier in the progress report the various opinions we had in the year, there are a number of good areas, so budget management, main financial systems, council tax, NNDR, business rates, all receive substantial opinions, and these are core underpinning key fundamental areas of any local authority, and we found those to be working well with raising kind of very, very few findings. Obviously, there are some areas to balance that where we have moderate opinions around project management, the effectiveness of sickness management, obviously the limited we've just talked about on commercialisation. However, with some of those, and commercialisation being an example, well, actually, in the grand scheme of things, financially at least, that's a small amount compared to main financial systems where all your expenditure goes through council tax, which is obviously a significant sum of money. In those core areas, we're finding some really good controls and things operating well. And so on balance, that's why we've then reached a moderate opinion, which from us is a thumbs up, areas to improve, but actually broadly we're content that the governance, risk and control environment is operating well. The rest of the report has some formalities in there that we have to put in around our opinion, which just sets out that detail, but otherwise happy to take any particular questions on the head of internal audit opinion.
Thank you, Gurpreet. Has anybody got any questions for Gurpreet or any areas there they need clarifying? No? Oh, yes, Councillor Clooney.
Hi again. Yeah, just to say thanks very much for all the work you've all put in the internal audit side, including the people at the council as well. Thanks very much, and I can absolutely appreciate the fact that we did get a good, what you'd rate as a good rating, because our key services, the key things we do, where most of our money comes and goes, is pretty well controlled. So yeah, thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Clooney. go back to the... Right, so it's back to the recommendations, which are on page 9, plus the additional part which Councillor Lawrence put forward. Can you remind us of that, Councillor Lawrence?
Director responsible for commercialisation to provide a report to the next committee. I think we could also have another resolution in the terms that Councillor Clooney was talking about, and that was to thank the BDO for their detailed work, and to thank the officers for their work as well, bearing in mind staffing and implications of COVID-19. We do know that a lot of officers have been working from home, still doing their job, and I do think that they do deserve some praise from this committee. I'm sure Alec can come up with a suitable resolution.
Okay, can I have a second for all that? Thank you, we've got 2. Then we'll have Councillor Miller's seconding that one then officially. Okay, those in favour of the recommendations? Anyone against? Any abstentions? Looks like it's carried unanimously. Good, okay. Next one now is agenda item 5, the draft annual government statement for 2021. It's on pages 117 to 119. I'm going to lead on that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, as Chair says, the report presents our draft annual governance statement for 2021, which members are recommended to note and to provide any comments for inclusion in the final version prior to its sign-off by the leader and the chief executive in its inclusion as an accompanying statement to the Council's statement of accounts. The final version of this document will come back to this committee along with the statement of accounts in the autumn. And that's where you'll actually be approving the final version. So as you're aware, and just by way of a bit of background, the Council is responsible for ensuring that its business is conducted in accordance with the law and proper standards, and that public money is safeguarded and properly accounted for, and that value for money is secured in the delivery of the Gedling plan. And our governance framework comprises the systems and processes and controls that seek to ensure that all of that is secured. We are required by regulation to conduct an annual review of the effectiveness of those governance arrangements and to prepare the annual governance statement, the draft of which is actually attached to Appendix 1 to the report. So the governance statement, first of all, just provides a summary of our framework in paragraphs 3 to 5, and the annual review of the effectiveness of the governance arrangements is included in paragraph 6 of the statement. So this includes assurance that we receive from all of our executive managers as they're described in the report, and that's our senior leadership team and heads of service. And they do that, provide that assurance for us through completion of a checklist that services are operating in compliance with all the Council's policies and internal control and governance assurance framework. So all of the financial regs and that kind of, all of those processes. And I can confirm that each head of service has provided a positive assurance for the whole of last year. The next assurance comes from our external auditor, and that's through the value for money conclusion. And you'll recall seeing this within the external audit report at a recent committee, and they confirmed that we've got satisfactory arrangements in place for value for money. A point to note here, and you might recall that from at the previous meeting, the external auditor said that there are increased requirements for our value for money assessment this year. So that is a report by exception, so that it is a little bit more in depth than it used to be. So that might affect some of the governance, the issues for the governance statement, and they'll be included in the final version if that's the case. So the final assurance comes from internal audit, and we've just heard from Gurpreet that they've provided unqualified internal audit opinion this year. So that's where they describe that moderate assurance, but actually it's the most positive assurance that any local authority have received of their clients this year. So they are confirming that our governance arrangements are okay. So I think we can conclude that the annual review of effectiveness hasn't highlighted any significant governance issues that haven't been addressed during the year. So you can be assured that the arrangements are operating effectively. There are, though, a couple of significant issues that did arise last year that are probably just worth drawing attention to. And you probably won't be surprised that the first one of those is COVID-19, which emerged during last year's governance statement. You'll remember that. But obviously has gone all the way through 2021 and is still ongoing. The second issue was the change in our senior management arrangements, and they're both reflected in the report. In terms of COVID, the key issues and actions are detailed in 7.2 of the statement, and they cover all the arrangements that we made throughout the year in terms of our council decision-making and meetings, the impact on our service delivery and its management through business continuity changes, and the financial and service impacts which were dealt with through the medium-term planning and the Gedling plan. And so all of those services are confirmed as operating effectively, the governance and arrangements around those, and that those items of the Gedling plan were signed off by Council in March. So that second governance issue that we raised was related to the departure of the previous chief exec, and we had interim management arrangements through a lot of last financial year as we implemented phase 2 towards the latter end. And I can confirm that during that period, all of the appropriate governance arrangements were put in place, so including the appointment of all of the required statutory officers through that period. So just turning finally to the action plan. So that's detailed in paragraph 7.4 of the governance statement, which reviews the actions that we undertook last year. So then from the 2019-20 annual governance statement, which included 8 actions, 4 of those have been fully completed. 2 of them have been deferred due to COVID, and that's related to officer training following the review of the Constitution and the implementation of a new process for officers' declarations of interest. Both of those will now be going forward during this financial year. One of those actions was deleted, and that was related to the commercial property investment strategy, which was removed during last year due to a change in the borrowing rules that Her Majesty's Treasury introduced. And finally, one of those has been retained, so it was the watching brief related to COVID. So we've implemented a lot of actions during last year, so any new legislation requirements were addressed, but we've just left it in as a watching brief because there are likely to still be some outcomes of that change. So just finally, the new actions that have been included, they're included at paragraph 7.4 also for 2021. And the key items included there are a further review of the medium-term plan, just to make sure that we continue to keep on top of the impacts of COVID delivery, the delivery of the new efficiency programme that we've approved, and of course monitoring of commercial operations we've flagged in there as well. We've got a watching brief included on workforce capacity. So as we've just mentioned, the senior management arrangements, we are now moving into phase 3 of our management restructure. So we're just going to keep an eye there on capacity of the workforce whilst that's happening and while new ways of working are embedded. And then there's the adoption of the Constitution and appropriate training. That will happen next year. The risk management strategy, which was deferred from last year due to COVID, will be reviewed and implemented in the current financial year. And then finally, there's a watching brief there on emerging legislation. And we've heard a little bit about the waste management processes in a previous audit. So we've got the Environment Act coming forward this year. So that's got new requirements for waste. So we'll be keeping an eye on those legislative requirements and making sure that resourcing and services are appropriately planned. So in conclusion, Chair, so I just say the review of the effectiveness of the governance framework can confirm no significant weaknesses in controls, and that we've addressed COVID-related impacts successfully during the year as the key issue. So the recommendations are on page 117, Chair, for committee to note the AGS and to provide any comments it wishes for inclusion in the draft to go forward to the leader and the chief exec.
Thank you, Alison. Has anybody got any questions on that topic for Alison? Okay, well, Alison's read out the recommendations that we note the draft of the annual government statement 2020-21 and provide any comments for inclusion in the final version when presented to the Audit Committee in the autumn. Have we got any comments to put in? Sorry, we can't hear you. Can you turn your microphone on?
I'll move the resolution that we note the draft annual government statement and look forward to it being presented in full, in final version at the next meeting of the Audit Committee.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Fox. All in favour? Please show. Any against? Unanimous again, thank you. Right, the next item is the Corporate Risk Management Scorecard, Quarter 4, 2020-2021, the report of the Head of the Finance and IC2. It's page 131 to 146. Paul. Right, can we introduce Paul Adcock, who is newly appointed to this post? Good luck, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. So I'm Paul Adcock, new Head of Finance and RCT. Just coming to the end of my first month here at Gedling. So I've been given the opportunity tonight to kind of present this report to the committee. Members are already familiar with this report, the format of it, what it's looking to do. This is just the next quarterly update to reflect what's happened in the period from January to March 2021. Members will be aware that the Corporate Risk Register is a key part of the Council's corporate governance arrangements, and having to review that regularly is kind of a key part of the corporate governance framework that alludes really to the report that Alison just outlined previously. You'll see set out in the report for you this evening, for each of the 13 risks that we've got, a series of the actions that have been completed, some updates in certain cases, and some additional actions that have been added. There are two particular risks I'd like to draw to members' attention tonight, both where we think the position has improved to a significant extent to allow us to actually increase our risk scores in a positive direction. The first one is risk 1, which is the failure to keep within approved budgets. Again, we've moved that score from a B3, which is a low likelihood serious impact, to B1, which is low likelihood negligible impact, and that now shows as green. Clearly, with the whole COVID situation, been a very turbulent year for local authority finances generally. But here at Gedling, what we've managed to do, managed to keep our overall income and expenditure within our approved budget for the year, and that's going to be reported to Cabinet next week. Again, that demonstrates really kind of the controls that we've got in place, and mitigation is kind of working effectively. So again, we think that's a positive, and then we can move that risk score in a positive direction for us. The other one is risk 10, which is about maintaining service standards, customer satisfaction, and customer expectation. That one, again, you'll see there we've improved that risk score there from a C3, significant likelihood, serious impact, to B2, low likelihood, minor impact. Again, throughout the pandemic, I think service standards have largely been maintained. Different ways of working have had to be adopted throughout the course of the last 12 to 15 months. And yet service standards remain high, complaints are low, and hence we think what we need to do now is to kind of maintain that progress. Again, we can't be complacent, but what we need to do is, we think, in terms of the risk register itself, that demonstrates that the various controls we've got, the monitoring, the review that we do, is kind of having the desired impact and the right effect. So there were just kind of two particular ones I'd like to draw to members' attention tonight. If you go on to Appendix 2, that one there, you'll see there where we had the risk matrix. There's only one item there that's currently showing as red, which is probably the most significant one from our perspective in the finance function. That's about maintaining financial integrity, really the whole financial resilience of the organisation. I think you'll find in most local authorities that scores as red as well. Clearly, we know that what we need to do is probably changing legislation going forwards, fair funding review, the way local authorities are funded going forwards is probably going to change, and what impact that will have, we will need to kind of keep an eye on, assess, model various scenarios as well, and bring them back to members. So, again, we think that is still a red, and we'll continue to make sure we've got proper measures and controls in place to mitigate the impact of that risk upon the council. That's kind of the only kind of comments. The recommendation tonight is that the progress of the action has been noted, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that any members may have. Thank you.
Hi, sorry, I've got to look away from you to use the microphone. Just like to say that I welcome the report on the risk register here and, the risk scorecard and the progress we've made, particularly in terms of sticking with the budget for a very difficult year that ended this March just gone. And then also the great service we're obviously giving during times of COVID in terms of the service and the other risk that's improved during this time. So great thanks to everybody that's been involved in achieving those things.
Thank you, Councillor Clooney. Before we move to the recommendations, anybody else got anything? Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I was going to say almost the same thing Councillor Clooney said. It's always good when risks are downgraded, and the risk, which is red, well, everybody knows the reasons for that and the difficulty of changing that in the current political and environment. I'd just like to ask, I seem to remember that we used to have a traffic light system on this section of the reports so that we could actually see at a glance what was green, what was red, what was amber. Was there any reason why it was changed, or am I making it up?
Sorry, through you, Chair. Yeah, if you go to Appendix 2, at the end of the report, you'll see there what that does. That table you've got just there in front of you, yeah, what that does, that shows you which risks fall within green, amber and red. And you'll see there, just risk 2. That's the only one that we've got currently showing as amongst the reds.
Within each of the sections, so that in section 1 there'd actually be a little green ball. Have I made this up?
I think you might have, Meredith. Yeah. but if that's something, so it's always been in narrative form. Within the body of the report. But if you find that helpful, then that's certainly something that we could add.
Well, it seems to me that it does make it easier, and also it shows how good we are. Basically, that instead of having the black-green, we actually have a green symbol.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Clooney.
Yeah, I was just going to say back to that, thinking about I think the key performance indicators, if we do get a little colour on that, so you might be thinking about that possibly.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's in the service plan monitoring. Yeah.
Thank you. Before we then move to the recommendation, I'd like to draw members' attention to the small input I had into this. If we go to page 139, near the bottom, a new risk added, Mapley Tunnel. About a month ago, I was made aware of unauthorised access to the tunnel by a group of explorers, I suppose you better call them. I mentioned this to the appropriate officers, and it's now been included in here. The heavy-duty barriers had been damaged, whether by the group who went in or other people, and we are going to make it much safer in some way and have a regular check to ensure that those barriers remain in place, because that tunnel is dangerous. And it would be disastrous if an individual went in there, part of the tunnel collapsed and killed them. It would be disastrous for them, their family, but also our reputation. So I'm pleased I had a small input. Okay, back to page 131. Recommendation is that we note the progress of actions identified in the corporate risk register. Councillor Lawrence?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to move that resolution with the addition of being pleased that 2 of the risks have been downgraded. Perhaps pleased being, I was thinking of a better word than pleased. But I think it's important to recognise that 2 of the risks have been downgraded.
Okay. Right, so can I have a seconder for that? Seconder? Thank you, Councillor Clooney. Those in favour, please show. Any against? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end, doesn't it? Right. Any other items which the Chair considers urgent? Nope, unless we've got what's happening in the football match. No. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I declare the meeting closed.